Hello, my name is Kirk Person. I'm a senior consultant in education and literacy with SIL International, and I'm very pleased to be joining you via video today for this important event focusing on the International Decade of Indigenous Languages and the Ocean Decade. I'm very grateful to Teresa Kennedy and Irmgarda Kasinkate for this opportunity. Now, as is perhaps appropriate to the subject of your forum, I am right now at the ocean. I'm on an island in the Indian Ocean. As you can see behind me, this is not a screensaver. It is the actual live footage of life on a Thai beach. I've spent the last 30 years or so working throughout Southeast Asia on issues related to indigenous languages. And I've also had the opportunity to interact with a lot of NGO partners during that time. So I feel that the topic of this session on cross-disciplinary, cross-sector actions involving NGOs is highly appropriate. Now, I'd like to begin with a story from quite close to here, the story of the Arakwal people. Now, you may recall in 2004, the tsunami that devastated this area of the world. Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, over 200,000 people were killed. But not one person was killed among a small ethnic minority group, a small indigenous group called the Arakwal. Now, the Arakwal have lived very close to the sea for centuries. Sometimes in tourist brochures, they're called sea gypsies, along with two other groups that are often classed as that. Now, the Arakwal have an extensive traditional knowledge of the sea. They can navigate without any sort of modern equipment with amazing accuracy. They can read the moods of the sea to determine which days they should go fishing and where to fish. And their elders had passed down the knowledge that if the sea waters ever receded suddenly, they should run for the hills because the sea would come back with great fierceness. And that is exactly what happened in 2004. The Arakwal saw the sea go out, they ran to the hills, and they were all saved. Nonetheless, this traditional knowledge that has saved them in the past has had some difficult times adjusting to all the pressures of modernity. They are facing language loss and cultural loss. And that's one reason why a Swiss-based foundation, the Pestalozzi Children's Foundation, and a Thai university have collaborated to create a mother tongue-based multilingual education program among Arakwal children in the kindergarten and first grades to try to preserve their language and culture. To do this, they created an orthography based on the Thai alphabet, but with a few adaptations, and trained young people from within the community to use these materials to teach the children in very interactive ways. Now, originally the program was for smaller children, but some of the older teenagers who were technically out of school, most of them had dropped out after grade 6, became interested in the program through non-formal education programs that they were having once a week. So some of these out-of-school teens have helped develop materials for the younger children. Again, talking about aspects of their language and culture. Now, you might notice a blonde-haired kid in the middle of this group. This is actually my son, who led the teens in creating materials about diving safety, which is actually one of the biggest threats to life and limb of the Arakwal today. And again, this has cross-sectoral roots. Due to land grabs by rich developers, due to increased regulations from the Forest Department, other pressures related to, lifestyle and traditional lifestyles, food security and things like that. The Arakwal have abandoned their traditional fishing ways, which involved a lot of free diving with no equipment, and have been compelled to drop their fish cages in much deeper waters, 50, 60 meters. These fish cages are great at catching fish. The problem is the Arakwal need to go down to collect the fish, and they use air compressors of the type that you'd use to pump up a motorcycle tire, attached to long garden hoses to go 50 to 60 meters under the sea, stay there for sometimes several hours to collect the fish. And then when they come up, they often have problems with decompression sickness. In the last year, 3 Arakwal have died from this practice, and many, many more have been hospitalized. A few have made it to the hyperbaric chamber 6 hours away on the island resort of Phuket. But all these are those type of cross-sectoral issues that we talk about when we look at what things different NGOs can bring to the Ocean Decade and the Decade of Indigenous Languages. Now, as one who's worked in this field for about 30 years, I am super excited about the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. I'm very happy to see this focus, and I think it's something that can be more than just a PR stunt. I really love the global action plan for the decade that you can see here, because it's much more inclusive than past UN documents about Indigenous peoples. For various reasons, the definition of Indigenous used by the UN and by many countries had excluded most of the Indigenous peoples of Africa and Asia. I'd say at least 2,000 languages and ethnic groups were excluded by those definitions, including the young ladies at the top of this flyer, who are from a Thai group, northern Thailand, the Aka, and would have not been considered Indigenous under these previous definitions. So first of all, from the Global Action Plan, I welcome this more inclusive vision of what it means to be Indigenous. By the way, I have QR codes on a number of these slides if you want to access these web resources more easily. Now, if you look into the Global Action Plan, you see lots of things that we NGO people can kind of hang our hats on or attach to. For example, besides the very general sort of philosophical goals of the decade, there are some very concrete outputs and activities that are listed. There are 10 main outputs with activities under them all. And as I look through these with my glasses as a representative of SIL International, I can see that my NGO can contribute significantly to outputs number 1, 3, and 10. Maybe others of you can contribute to other outputs related to youth empowerment, girls and women's issues, health and livelihood, and things like that. So I'd really encourage you to look at this Global Action Plan and see how even your NGO's experiences, maybe not directly with Indigenous people, but how some of those experiences and expertise could be used to help Indigenous peoples, or rather to work alongside Indigenous communities during this important decade. Many of these goals map over to the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, we in the NGO community have known about the Sustainable Development Goals for a long time. We talk about them all the time, sort of in a very general sense. But I've found that many people don't realize that behind the 17 goals are a whole series of targets for each goals. And each of those targets is measured by a very extensive set of indicators. Some of them are called global indicators required of all governments. Some are thematic indicators, which are kind of optional, depending if the government is interested in that area or even has the resources to check out those specific indicators. So for language, indicator 4.5.2 is of great interest to me, which asks governments to indicate the percentage of students in primary education whose first or home language is the language of instruction. So for Asia and Africa, that means including many more Indigenous languages in education. Now, again, in some places in North America where the Indigenous languages are no longer spoken in the home, where the children might be speaking English or Spanish as their first language, they would need something a little bit different, a revitalization program to help them learn that heritage language. But in places where the heritage language is still very actively used in the home, we can see these type of mother tongue-based multilingual education programs working. And it's not only this indicator, but numerous other indicators, such as school readiness, literacy rates, and things like that, also are impacted by ethnicity and home language. For example, here in Thailand, the government is justly proud of a very high literacy rate nationwide, around 98%. But if you look at children from Indigenous groups, that rate drops to about 42%. So as we disaggregate data based on language and ethnicity, sometimes we can see areas that really need a lot more focus. And this is, again, something that NGOs can bring to the table because often governments won't be focused on these issues and may have no clue of how to collect such data. So we can help them do that and just work together for these goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the goals of the Indigenous Decade. For example, in September, at the UN General Assembly, there was the Transforming Education Summit. And right at the entrance to the UN General Assembly Hall, UNICEF put up this huge display proclaiming that only 1 in 3 10-year-olds globally can actually read and understand a simple story. This came from a World Bank report, I think it was in July of this year, that said 70% of children worldwide are in learning poverty. That number had increased since 50% before COVID. In some African countries, it's 90%, again, defining learning poverty as lacking the basic literacy and numeracy skills that are needed. So because this display was so prominent, many of the plenary speakers at the Transforming Education Summit referred to it, just sort of saying, what is going on? Why can so many children not read? This is such a basic thing. We should be able to do this. Sadly, one of the things that many at that Transforming Education Summit did not discuss was the language dimension of literacy. And in fact, again, the World Bank, who you wouldn't think of as necessarily an educational research group, but they're doing a lot more in this area. The World Bank has estimated that 40% of the global population does not receive education in a language they actually speak or understand. And we know from extensive research involving migrant children in Canada and the United States, as well as Indigenous groups throughout the world, that it's very difficult for a child to learn how to read or to do math in a language that they really haven't mastered, that they haven't internalized yet. And so this language dimension is a huge part of the global literacy crisis. And I think it's great that the Indigenous Decade can draw focus to this. Here in Asia, we have many good examples of pilot projects and increasingly national policies that support the use of Indigenous languages in education. In Thailand, we're now using 6 of them in formal education. Cambodia has 6. During COVID, Cambodia actually did radio broadcasts in Indigenous languages to keep the children in those mother tongue programs learning. The Philippines takes the medal for Asia. They are currently doing this type of work in 66 Indigenous languages with strong support from the communities for children from age kindergarten to grade 3 to be studying primarily in their mother tongue or their home language. If you'd like to learn more about this, you're welcome to visit the Asia Pacific Multilingual Education Working Group's website. The working group is a coalition comprised of UNESCO, UNICEF, SIL, CARE, Pestalozzi Children's Foundation, several other international NGOs, as well as academics and others who are really dedicated to advancing these notions about mother tongue-based education, Indigenous language education throughout the Asia Pacific area. And you can mark your calendars now because in early October of 2023, we don't have the exact date yet, but in early October, we will be having our 7th International Conference on Multilingual Education. The Decade of Indigenous Languages will be a main focus of that conference. We expect, typically we draw 300 to 400 people from all over the world. At least half of them are Indigenous people or people from ethnic minority groups who are doing these kind of ground roots type of things. And so it's just a wonderful time where they can come together, share experiences, and inspire one another. So again, I'm very thankful for this opportunity to talk to all of you, and maybe I'll see some of you next year in Bangkok, and perhaps after the conference, you can even come down to a place like this and enjoy our wonderful Thai beaches. Thank you very much. Best wishes for the remainder of your conference. Goodbye.